Welcome to a deep dive into the world of professional writing. We asked you guys to send in excerpts from author Angela Hunt's newsletter, Write Well, and she's written like over 165 books, I think.
Wow.
So that's a lot of writing.
It is, yeah.
So we're going to take a look at what she has to say about things like editing, self-publishing, dialogue, all that stuff.
It's always great to get insights from those people who have actually been there and done that.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start with one of the first things she talks about, which is the difference between substantive editing and copy editing. And she uses some interesting terms to describe these two. She calls substantive editing macro, and then copy editing is line by line.
Right.
So what do you think about those descriptions?
I think they're good. I think they're really accurate. Substantive editing really is about the big picture, like you were saying. It's about making sure the story works as a whole, that the characters are compelling, that the plot makes sense. Copy editing is more about the fine details like grammar, punctuation, consistency.
Yeah. It's kind of like building a house.
Yeah.
You need a good foundation and framework before you start worrying about like what color to paint it or what kind of doorknobs you're going to use.
Exactly. And Angela Hunt, she uses a great analogy to illustrate this point. She says that asking for a copy edit when what you really need is a substantive edit is like getting your teeth cleaned when what you really need is a root canal.
Ooh, that's a good one. I like that.
Yeah, it's pretty painful.
Yeah. And she also shares a story about her own experience with substantive editing. She had this novel that she thought was brilliant, and her editors told her it was unpublishable because it was too intellectual.
Ouch.
And they said novels are about emotion. So she had to rewrite the entire book, focusing on the emotional core of the story.
It can be so hard to hear that,
No, I know. But you know what? It's true. Because how many times have we all read something and we're just like, oh, okay, that's very interesting, but it doesn't grab us emotionally.
Right, exactly. And this is why it's so valuable to have a trusted editor or critique partner who can provide that honest and constructive criticism, because sometimes we just can't see our own work objectively.
No, we can't. We can't. And it's interesting. She even mentions this word STET. Have you ever heard of this? It's a proofreading mark that you use if you want to keep your original wording, even though the editor has suggested a change. So you're basically saying, nope, I like it the way I wrote it.
Right.
But as she wisely points out, you don't want to come across as difficult or unwilling to accept feedback.
Right.
It's about finding that balance between trusting your instincts and being open to suggestions.
Mm.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about self-publishing. Angela Hunt gets a lot of questions about whether self-publishing on Amazon is actually profitable, and she says it's really impossible to give a definitive answer without knowing the specifics of your situation.
Oh, for sure. And I think she's right about that, too. There are so many factors that go into the success of self-publishing, like genre, marketing strategy, and, just the quality of the book.
Right, yeah. But she stresses that having a solid platform is essential, meaning like you've got a built-in audience that's eager to read your work.
Right.
She says the most important factor is having a TV or radio show or even a popular podcast.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, she even mentions John Grisham self-published his first book, and he sold copies out of the trunk of his car. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great story of perseverance, but it also highlights the point that, with self-publishing, you really have to wear a lot of different hats.
Yeah.
You're not just the writer, you're the marketer, the distributor, sometimes even the salesperson.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, this leads to the whole self-publishing versus traditional publishing debate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a big one. Well, one thing that Angela Hunt brings up that I think a lot of new writers don't realize is that it can actually be easier to get traditionally published with NO sales record than with a poor sales record from self-published books.
Wow, okay. Can you explain that a little more?
Sure. So, a traditional publisher, they're essentially taking a gamble on a new author, right? But if you've already self-published and those books haven't sold well, it might make them hesitant to take that risk. They might see it as an indication that your work isn't marketable.
I see. So, I mean, even if you're planning to go the traditional publishing route, it's still important to make sure you're putting out, high-quality work from the start.
Absolutely. And that's where having an agent can be so valuable. A good agent can help you navigate the complexities of the publishing world and make sure your work is presented in the best possible light. They can advocate for you and negotiate on your behalf.
Right. And she even mentions that A lot of traditional publishers won't even consider like unagented manuscripts. So, I mean, finding an agent can be crucial if you're hoping to go that route.
Definitely. And, just to clarify for anyone who might not be familiar with this, literary agents typically work on commission. So they usually take a percentage of your earnings, often around 15% for U.S. sales. And this includes any advance that you receive on royalties, which is basically, an upfront payment from the publisher.
Okay, so just to be clear, if a publisher gives you a $10,000 advance on your book,
Yeah.
then the agent would usually get 15% of that, which is $1,500, and you would receive the remaining $8,500.
Right, exactly. And it's also important to understand that agents, they only make money when you make money.
Right.
So they're invested in your success, which is good.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, now let's move on to something that I think every writer struggles with at some point, and that's dialogue. Angela Hunt has a really interesting take on this. She says that realistic dialogue is not necessarily good dialogue. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think she's onto something there. It's easy to fall into the trap of trying to capture every and every little side conversation, but
Yeah.
that can actually make the dialogue feel really clunky and unnatural.
Yeah, it's like those movies where the dialogue sounds like a transcript of a real-life conversation.
Yeah.
It can be so boring.
Yeah, exactly. Good dialogue. It should be concise. It should be engaging. It should move the story forward and reveal something about the characters. I always think of it like a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble to reveal the essence of the form underneath.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, just really getting to the heart of it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, she also has some great advice on how to create unique character voices.
Mm.
She says to focus on word choice rather than accents.
That makes sense. Accents can be really tricky to pull off in writing, and they can sometimes come across as stereotypical or even offensive. It's better to focus on how the character's background, education, and personality shape the way they speak.
Right. And she even admits that she needs to work on this herself.
Yeah.
So it's something that even experienced writers have to be mindful of.
Yeah, it's really about finding those subtle nuances that make each character's voice distinct and memorable.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm curious to hear what you think about her WAGS acronym for evaluating novel ideas. It stands for World, Active Protagonist, Goal, and Stakes.
I think it's a really useful tool, especially for writers who are just starting out. It can really help you assess whether your idea has the potential to be a compelling story because, a strong story, it needs a vivid and engaging world, a protagonist who is proactive, really driving the action, a clear goal that the protagonist is striving for, and stakes that are high enough to make the reader care about the outcome.
Okay, so let's break that down a little further. What does she mean by world?
So by world, she's talking about creating a setting that draws the reader in and makes them feel like they're really part of the story. It could be a fantastical world, it could be a historical setting, it could even be a contemporary city. The important thing is that it feels real and believable to the reader.
Okay, and what about an active protagonist?
An active protagonist is someone who makes choices and takes actions that drive the plot forward. They're not just reacting to events, they're shaping the story.
Okay, and goal?
The goal is what the protagonist is trying to achieve. It should be something that is meaningful to them and something that the reader can root for.
Okay, and then finally, stakes.
The stakes are the consequences of failure. They're what's at risk if the protagonist doesn't achieve their goal. And, the higher the stakes, the more tension and suspense you're going to create in the story.
Okay, well, she also emphasizes the importance of that first, 20 to 25% of the novel.
Right.
That's where you're setting the stage, introducing the characters, establishing the world.
Yeah, it's like laying the foundation for a house. If the foundation is weak, the whole structure is going to crumble.
Exactly. And she says that inciting incident, that event that kind of kicks off the main conflict of the story, shouldn't happen until around that 20 to 25% mark. And she actually says to think about what happens around minute 22 or 23 of a movie. That's when, that main plot often kicks in.
That's so interesting. I've never thought about it like that, but it's true.
It is true, yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. She shares a story about this guy she met who had this, great idea for a novel, but he didn't want to write it. He wanted to find somebody else to do it, which I hear all the time.
Oh, me too, yeah.
People think, I've got this $1 million idea for a book, but they don't want to put in the time and effort to actually write it.
Right. Yeah, that's like someone saying, I have a great idea for a restaurant, but I don't want to cook or manage it. Can you just do it for me?
Right, exactly. And she has another great example, though. After learning about Ötzi, that 5,000-year-old mummified man found in the Alps, She was inspired to write her novel, The Truth Teller, about a woman who unknowingly gives birth to a caveman's child. Talk about an intriguing premise.
That is interesting.
And that's where we'll pick up next time. We'll explore more of Angela Hunt's wisdom on dialogue, character development, and the importance of finding truth in storytelling.
Sounds great. Welcome back to our deep dive into professional writing. Before we dig back into Angela Hunt's advice, I wanted to touch on something she said in the last part about Ötzi the Iceman inspiring a novel.
Oh, yeah. It really shows how, like, a single spark of inspiration can, like, ignite an entire story.
And it's a great example of how research can fuel creativity, too.
Speaking of research, Angela Hunt highlights the importance of joining a book club, especially for writers.
Oh, for sure. It's an invaluable way to get feedback from, like, actual readers, you know? You can see what resonates with them, what confuses them, what keeps them turning the pages.
Yeah, it's like you're getting a glimpse into the minds of your audience.
Exactly.
You see how your work is being perceived, like, by people who aren't fellow writers.
Right. And it can be humbling, too. Sometimes what we think is brilliant, like, falls flat. And sometimes what we think is just okay turns out to be a reader favorite.
Yeah, that's true.
You just never know.
You never know. She also cautions against using, like, overly obscure vocabulary. She mentions reading this novel where she had to constantly stop to look up words, and it really disrupted the flow of the story.
Right. It's a good reminder that clarity is key. While using evocative language is important, you don't want to alienate your readers with words they don't understand.
Right. It's about finding that balance between, being creative with language, but also being accessible to your audience.
Right.
Now, this next piece of advice might sound a little unusual. She talks about this technique she calls writing sideways. Have you ever heard of that?
I have. Yeah, it's a technique for evaluating your writing by, like, literally looking at your sentences in landscape mode.
Okay, so you're basically pasting a scene into a word processor
Mm-hmm.
and then switching to landscape mode and then hitting return until each sentence has its own line.
Right, exactly. And it forces you to really look at the structure of your sentences. Are they varied in length? Do they have a good rhythm? Are the verbs active and engaging?
Yeah, it's a way to step back and see your writing from a different perspective.
Totally.
And she even suggests trying to write in landscape mode just to, like, shake things up and break out of those habitual patterns that we all fall into.
Right. It's about finding those tools and techniques that help you see your writing with fresh eyes.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
Now, Angela Hunt uses a really interesting analogy to describe the writing process. She compares it to being a gladiator. What are your thoughts on that analogy?
I think it's incredibly apt. It speaks to the courage and resilience that writers need to have. You're putting yourself out there, you're facing rejection, you're constantly striving to improve your craft.
Yeah, and she even talks about her own experience taking fencing in college. And she wasn't like the most skilled fencer, but she won a few matches because her opponents underestimated her tenacity. They didn't expect her to attack with such ferocity.
That's a great story. I love that.
I know, it's so good.
Yeah.
And so she connects this back to writing by quoting a Roman military strategist. If you're afraid to get hurt, you shouldn't be a soldier. If you don't know what to do in the arena, training is useless. If you don't have the courage to act, your skills are wasted.
Wow.
I know, right?
That's powerful.
It's powerful. And it's about having not just the skill, but also the heart and the will to put yourself out there and keep fighting, even when it feels like an uphill battle.
Definitely.
And she also emphasizes that the arena of writing is going to cost you something. It's going to cost you time, effort, and those, like, lazy weekends where you can be doing something else.
Right. Yeah, she even brings in a quote from the Bible where King David says, "I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing," It's a reminder that anything worth achieving requires sacrifice.
Exactly. And speaking of sacrifice, she talks about, like, her early days as a writer. She could have wallpapered a room with all the rejection letters she received. I know. But she didn't give up. She kept writing, she kept learning, and eventually those rejection letters turned into acceptance letters.
That's so inspiring. It really is.
It's a great example of how perseverance can pay off, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Okay. Now, I thought her advice on using the word you in first-person writing was really interesting. She says it can be incredibly effective because it creates, like, this direct connection with the reader, drawing them into the story and making them feel like they're part of the experience.
Yeah, I've always found that to be true, too. When a writer uses you effectively, It's almost like they're having a conversation with the reader, you know?
It's like those personality quizzes that we all secretly love.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about that personal connection, that sense of being understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she gives some really practical tips on how to do this. You can use you in the opening sentence to grab the reader's attention. You can use it in the body of the piece to make the reader feel like they're experiencing the story alongside you. And you can even use it in the closing to leave the reader with a thought-provoking question or a call to action.
It's a great way to make your writing feel more engaging and immersive, you know?
Yeah, she even points out that Jesus often started conversations with a question.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So,
It's a powerful way to engage someone and invite them into a dialogue.
okay. Now let's talk about something that I think every writer struggles with at some point, and that is passive voice. Angela Hunt has a real vendetta against those sneaky little verbs,
Mhm.
was and were.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah, they can be real energy sappers in writing. They make sentences feel really weak and passive.
She calls them weasel words, and I love that
I love that.
because they sneak into our writing and suck the life out of it.
I know. It's so true.
And she really encourages writers to be ruthless in hunting down those passive constructions and replacing them with active, dynamic verbs.
You're right, exactly.
It's about making your writing feel more direct and powerful.
Oh,
Okay, now she also delves into the sometimes murky world of ghostwriting and collaboration. She says she doesn't ghostwrite anymore because she considers it dishonest.
yeah, it's definitely an ethical gray area.
Yeah.
You know, if someone is putting their name on a book that they didn't actually write, it's misleading to the reader.
Right. But she is open to collaborations as long as her name appears on the book, even if it's in small print.
Yeah.
She just wants there to be transparency.
Yeah, it's about giving credit where credit is due.
Okay. And then she throws in a little tidbit for those who love legal thrillers. She explains the difference between a mystery and a suspense novel.
Yeah.
Apparently, a mystery is all about solving a puzzle.
Mhm.
Who did it and why? It's a battle of wits between the reader and the detective. And a suspense novel is more about creating that atmosphere of tension and uncertainty.
Yeah.
You're keeping the reader guessing not just about who the culprit is, but also about what might happen next.
Right. I think a good example of that is like the movie Jaws. You know something bad is going to happen, but you don't know when or how.
Right, exactly. It's about building that sense of dread and anticipation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about something that Angela Hunt feels very strongly about, and that's recollections and flashbacks.
Yeah, she's not a fan, especially in the first 30 pages of a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, she says they disrupt the flow of the story and can make it harder for the reader to get invested in the present moment. She suggests avoiding them altogether in those first 30 pages and then using them sparingly throughout the rest of the book.
That's interesting. I wonder if that applies to screenwriting as well.
I think it might. You know, flashbacks can be tricky to pull off in any medium. They can feel really jarring or disorienting if they're not handled carefully.
Right. And she offers this clever trick for spotting those flashbacks. Do a global search for the word had and replace it with AJD in all caps.
That's a good one. Yeah, it's a great way to make those flashbacks stand out so you can really evaluate whether they're necessary or if they're just bogging down the story.
Right. It's all about being critical of your own work and making sure every element is serving the story.
Yeah.
Now, Angela Hunt also has some strong opinions about how to handle those internal monologues or thought processes of your characters.
Right. So many writers get bogged down in using italics or clunky phrases like he thought or she wondered.
And she advocates for a much more streamlined approach. Basically, you just write the character's thoughts directly, matching the tense to the story's tense. No need for italics or those clunky attributive tags.
Yeah, it's a much cleaner, more immersive way to handle those internal musings.
Right.
Okay.
Now, she also talks about kind of the financial realities of being a writer. She asks this tough question. Can you make a living as a writer?
Yeah, and she doesn't sugarcoat it either. She cites statistics showing that the median income for full-time authors in 2022 was only $2,000.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a pretty sobering statistic.
It is. It's a reminder that writing, it's often a labor of love.
Right.
Yeah.
But she also points out that there are writers who do make a good living, and the key is to, write books that people want to read.
Right. It's about understanding the market and crafting stories that resonate with a wide audience.
And she brings up the importance of having a platform, especially for those writing nonfiction or celebrity-driven books.
Right. So a platform is essentially Your online presence, your social media following,
Yeah.
your email list, your website. It's a way to connect with potential readers and build an audience for your work.
Okay, so if you're writing like a memoir or you're, I don't know, some celebrity chef writing a cookbook, you need to have this platform already in place.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And she offers some encouraging words for like, new writers who might be feeling discouraged. She reminds them that a first novel is often a learning experience, a kind of lab experiment.
Right, right. It's rare for a first novel to be perfect. It takes time and practice to develop your craft.
Right. And she even co-authored a book called My First Novel, where she and other writers share their experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh, that's cool. That's a great idea.
I know. It's a reminder that everyone starts somewhere, and the journey to becoming a successful writer, it's often filled with challenges and setbacks.
It is.
Okay. Now she moves on to the topic of point of view, or POV, which is something that a lot of writers struggle with.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And she breaks down the different types of POV: first person, second person, third person limited, and third person omniscient.
Right. And each POV has its own strengths and weaknesses. First person is great for creating a sense of intimacy, but it can be limiting in terms of scope. Third person limited allows you to delve into the thoughts and feelings of one character while maintaining some distance, but it can be challenging to convey the perspectives of other characters. And third person omniscient gives you that godlike overview of the story, but it can feel distant and detached if it's not handled carefully.
Right.
So it's all about finding the right tool for the job.
Right. And she provides some great examples of each POV in action, drawing from classic literature and her own work.
Oh, cool.
It's about finding the POV that best suits your story and your voice.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, she also dives into the nitty-gritty of description, contrasting the dense block paragraphs of older literature with the kind of more streamlined approach favored by modern writers.
Right. I think that's a reflection of how our attention spans have evolved. In today's fast-paced world, readers want information delivered quickly and efficiently.
Exactly. And she emphasizes the show don't tell principle, but she also acknowledges that there are times when telling or narrating is appropriate.
Yeah. It's about using the right tool for the job.
Exactly. Exactly. And she gives some great examples of how to effectively show a scene using vivid language and sensory details to draw the reader in.
Okay.
And I found her advice on using description to speed up or slow down time in a story really helpful.
Oh, yeah. It's a great way to control the pacing and create those moments of heightened tension or emotional impact.
And she explains how you could write a car crash scene in a way that makes time stretch out, allowing the reader to experience every heart-stopping detail.
Right.
Or you could describe a boring meeting in a way that makes it feel like it's flying by.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a great technique. Now, she also touches on the importance of plotting, even in nonfiction.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, a good story, regardless of genre, it needs a solid structure.
Right. And she introduces this visual plotting tool she calls the plot skeleton, which helps writers map out the key events of their story.
Okay.
It's a great way to visualize the overall arc of the story and make sure all the pieces fit together. And she stresses that subplots should always relate directly to the main character's story and goals. They shouldn't feel like random tangents or the writer's pet projects.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And she makes this point that I think a lot of new writers need to hear. Subplot characters should never take over the main character's story.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. It's so easy to get carried away with the secondary character, but you always need to remember that the main character is the heart of the story.
Exactly. And she uses this great analogy to illustrate this point. Think of the TV show Seinfeld. In later seasons, each episode would feature multiple storylines with Kramer and George and Elaine and Jerry all pursuing their own wacky adventures.
Right.
But those storylines would always intersect and converge in these unexpected and hilarious ways.
That's true.
And at the end of the day, it was always Jerry's show.
Right.
The other characters enriched the narrative, but they never overshadowed his central role.
Exactly.
And it's a masterclass in how to, juggle multiple storylines while maintaining a clear focus on the main character's journey.
It really is.
Okay. Now, Angela Hunt also emphasizes that supporting characters shouldn't just be window dressing. They should have their own goals and motivations, and their actions should impact the protagonist in meaningful ways.
Right. They should feel like real people, not just plot devices.
Right, right. And if they're not serving a purpose, why are they even in the story?
Exactly. It's about being economical with your characters and making sure each one earns their place in the narrative.
Right. And she offers this clever trick for creating a sense of tension and immediacy in a scene, and she calls it resisting the urge to explain.
Ooh.
Okay, so it's about like withholding information strategically and letting the reader piece together the clues and draw their own conclusions.
Right.
So for example, she suggests starting a scene with a character, overhearing a conversation, or witnessing an event without immediately revealing the full context.
Yeah,
Right.
And it like piques the reader's curiosity and makes them
So?
want to know more. Right?
exactly.
Yeah. And she also talks about the importance of creating a strong opening line. She says it should like make the reader ask a question, drawing them into the story, making them eager to find out what happens next.
Yeah, it's like that first bite of a delicious meal. It sets the tone and creates anticipation for what's to come.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay. And then she offers this technique that she learned from another author. When you're crafting a scene, think of each paragraph as a bucket for a single idea.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
So it's a helpful way to ensure that your paragraphs are focused and cohesive, and that each one is contributing to like the overall point you're trying to make.
Right.
And she provides some great examples of how to do this effectively, both in fiction and nonfiction. She even breaks down a scene from her own work, showing how she uses paragraphs to like build tension and create a sense of momentum.
That's really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even like the smallest unit of writing, the paragraph, can be crafted with intention and purpose.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, now I found this next concept really intriguing. She talks about something called pathetic fallacy, which is basically giving life and personality to inanimate objects so that they like reflect the emotions of a character.
Right. It's a subtle but effective way to like enhance the emotional impact of a scene.
Yeah, and she calls it mood music, which I love.
I love that.
So like, for example, she talks about how you could describe like the wind howling outside a character's window to mirror their inner turmoil.
Right.
Or you could describe the sun shining brightly to like reflect a character's happiness.
Right. It's about creating a symphony of sensory details that work together to evoke a particular mood or atmosphere.
And she emphasizes that this like mood music shouldn't be overdone. It should like blend seamlessly into the background, enhancing the emotional resonance of the scene without distracting the reader.
Right. Yeah. It's like the score of a film. It should enhance the emotional impact of the scene without drawing attention to itself.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, now she also offers some practical advice for dealing with those pesky ing verbs that can sometimes clutter up your writing.
Oh, yeah. Those ing verbs. They can be sneaky. They can weaken your sentences and make your writing feel passive and lifeless.
And she recommends doing a global search for ing and then carefully evaluating each one. If it's contributing to a sense of action and immediacy, great, keep it. But if it's just adding clutter, get rid of it.
Yeah, it's about being mindful of those like small but impactful choices that can make a big difference in the overall readability of your work.
Okay, now I loved her example of how to effectively like weave subplots into a larger narrative. And she uses the example of this young girl who wants to win a piano competition.
Oh, yeah. A classic underdog story.
Right. But to add some complications, her piano teacher is like this demanding taskmaster who pushes her to her limits. And her mother is overbearing and critical, constantly undermining her confidence.
Right. Those are great examples of how subplots can add layers of conflict and tension to the main story.
Right. And then, this is the best part, the boy next door, who secretly has a crush on her, accidentally slams her fingers in his car door. Ouch.
Poor girl.
And so those obstacles become like subplots in themselves. Now the girl has to deal with not only the pressure of the competition, but also the pain of her injury and the awkwardness of her interactions with this boy next door.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about creating this web of interconnected stories that like enrich and complicate the main narrative.
But she emphasizes that these subplots should never overshadow the main character's journey. The girl's quest to win the piano competition should remain the central focus of the story.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a reminder that subplots should enhance, not detract from the main storyline.
Okay. Now, Angela Hunt doesn't shy away from discussing the role of AI in writing, which is, a pretty controversial topic these days.
It is, yeah. Some people see it as a threat to human creativity, while others view it as like a valuable tool for writers.
And Angela Hunt seems to fall into the latter camp.
Yeah.
She believes that AI can be a helpful tool, but she also emphasizes the importance of using it responsibly and ethically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And she shares her own experiences using AI programs, including AutoCrit for editing, Night Cafe for illustrations, and ChatGPT and Claude as writing assistants.
Oh, wow.
I know. But she stresses that you should always carefully evaluate and revise any AI-generated content to ensure that it aligns with your own voice and style.
Right. It's about using AI as a tool, not a crutch. You're still the writer. You're the one who shapes the story and brings it to life.
I love that analogy.
Yeah,
It's about using AI as a partner, not a ghostwriter.
I love that.
And she gives this great tip. After revising a scene, run it through an AI detector, and if it gets flagged, rewrite it.
Oh, wow. I like that.
Right. It's about making sure your writing feels authentically you.
Exactly.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's talk about a tool that has revolutionized the writing process for a lot of authors. Scrivener.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Scrivener. That has been a game changer for me. Yeah, it's an all-in-one writing program that helps you stay organized and focused.
And Angela Hunt is a huge fan of Scrivener, and she breaks down some of its key features and benefits. For starters, it keeps everything you need in one place. You can store your research notes, create character sketches, outline your scenes, and even track your word count.
Right. No more juggling multiple documents and programs.
And it has this amazing feature that lets you visualize your manuscript. You can rearrange scenes and chapters with a simple drag and drop.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's like having a digital corkboard for your story.
And the best part is that Scrivener automatically saves your work, so you never have to worry about losing your precious words.
It's a writer's worst nightmare averted.
I know, seriously. And she also points out that Scrivener has templates for different types of writing, including fiction, nonfiction, and even screenplays.
Oh, cool. So it's a really versatile tool. It can adapt to your needs and your writing style.
Right. And if you're the kind of writer who likes to, obsess over word counts and deadlines, Scrivener has you covered. You can set daily writing goals and track your progress.
Oh, yeah. It's like having a built-in accountability partner.
Exactly. And she even shares a tip for those of us who, tend to overuse certain words or phrases. Scrivener has a feature that lets you see how many times you've used a particular word.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. That's really helpful.
It's a great way to, identify those verbal crutches that we all lean on from time to time. And she jokes that she probably won't use all of Scrivener's features, but she loves, the simplicity and efficiency of the program.
Yeah, it's about finding a tool that works for you, that streamlines your process, and frees up your mental energy to focus on the creative work of writing.
Right, exactly. And that's where we'll leave off for today. Join us next time as we explore more of Angela Hunt's wisdom on writing, including her thoughts on the kind of controversial role of AI in the creative process.
Welcome back to our deep dive into professional writing. We've covered a lot of ground with Angela Hunt's insights, and I'm really curious about what she has to say about writer's block.
It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and I think she has
Yeah.
a really interesting perspective on it. She suggests that maybe it's not really a block, but maybe a fear of failure, or a lack of confidence, or just a lack of inspiration.
Yeah, and she even admits to sometimes feeling like a fraud, like, who am I to be giving writing advice? I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling of self-doubt, whether we're writers or not.
Right.
It's that inner critic that whispers, you're not good enough, or what's the point?
Yeah. And she encourages writers to just push through those moments of doubt and just keep writing, even if it feels like they're slogging through mud.
Yeah.
Imagine it's like working out. Sometimes you just got to power through, even when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. It's about showing up consistently and putting in the work, even when it's tough. And she also emphasizes the importance of finding your own unique voice and embracing your individuality instead of trying to imitate other writers.
Oh, that's good. She quotes novelist Jane Smiley, who said, "Don't worry about finding your voice. It's right there inside you. Just relax and let it come out."
That's a great quote.
I love that. I think that's so true.
Yeah, it really is.
It brings up this question that I think a lot of us have pondered at some point.
Yeah.
Why do writers write?
Yeah.
Is it for fame, fortune, to change the world?
Angela Hunt has a really insightful take on this. She suggests that maybe it's not about any of those things. Maybe it's simply about the joy of creating, bringing something new and beautiful into the world. She even tells this story about a conversation she had with her daughter's art school classmates. And they were all talking about how they wanted to make a statement with their art to challenge societal norms.
Right. So it sounds like they were aiming for shock value.
Yes. And she responded by saying, well, I write to entertain people. I want them to laugh, to cry, to escape into a different world for a few hours.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid reason to create.
Absolutely.
It's about sharing like experiences and emotions and ideas with others. It's about connecting through storytelling.
For sure.
Speaking of connecting, Angela Hunt also talks about the difference between talent and skill.
That's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, what does she have to say about that?
Well, she proposes that talent might be like the speed at which you pick up a skill, but skill itself is developed through practice and perseverance.
So talent might give you a head start, but ultimately it's the hard work and dedication that determine your success.
Exactly. So that's reassuring for those of us who might not feel naturally gifted.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, she uses this quote from entrepreneur Dharmesh Shah, who said, "Skilled is the ability to do something. Talent is the rate at which you acquire the ability to do something."
That's a good one.
Yeah, and it really emphasizes like the importance of effort and persistence in any creative pursuit, really. But anyway, she also kind of challenges this like romanticized image of the writer as like this tortured genius scribbling away in a dimly lit attic.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And she compares writing to bricklaying, a craft that requires skill and precision and a willingness to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty.
That's a great analogy.
It's about showing up and doing the work day after day, brick by brick. And she offers this really powerful reminder that excellence in any field, really, is often the result of years of dedicated practice and a willingness to embrace failure as part of the learning process. And she even brings up the story of baseball legend, Ty Cobb.
Okay.
Now, I'm not a huge baseball fan. Refresh my memory about him.
Okay, well, Ty Cobb was one of the greatest hitters of all time, but even he failed more often than he succeeded, and that's true for most of us, isn't it?
Right.
We're going to strike out more than we hit a home run.
It's a humbling thought, but also a good reminder that failure is part of the journey.
Absolutely.
Well, Angela Hunt circles back to the use of AI in writing,
Ah.
and I find it really interesting how she sees it as a tool to enhance creativity rather than a replacement for it.
Right.
And she even shares this example of how she used an AI program to help her develop a plot for a thriller.
Oh, wow.
She gave it like some basic information. A young girl kidnapped by people who hate her father. And the program generated several potential storylines exploring, like, different angles and possibilities.
That's fascinating.
I know. It's fascinating to see how AI can be used in that creative process, but it's important to remember what she emphasizes, that the writer should always be in control, carefully evaluating and revising any AI-generated content to ensure it aligns with their vision and their voice.
Right.
It's about using AI as a partner, not a ghostwriter.
I love that.
And she gives that great tip. After revising a scene, run it through an AI detector. And if it gets flagged, rewrite it.
Oh, I like that.
Right. It's about making sure your writing feels authentically you.
Yeah, for sure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of professional writing with Angela Hunt, what's your biggest takeaway for our listener today?
For me, it's the reminder that writing is a craft that can be learned and honed through practice, persistence, and a willingness to embrace feedback.
And that it's okay to write for the pure joy of it, to entertain, to connect, to share your unique voice with the world. So to our listener, join a book club, experiment with different writing techniques, maybe try using an AI program as a brainstorming partner, but most importantly,
Keep writing.
because as Angela Hunt says, printed words have power, and the books we write have the potential to change lives.